And I'm like, okay, fine. Would you want to hire them? I don't know. Away from the residential wells in question. So now we say that there's, so the first two arguments are there's no way that these things could possibly be involved. But just in case, the USGS has shown that there were legacy oil and gas wells. So maybe the water is contaminated with oil and gas. Okay, but it would have been through legacy. And then lastly, there are no, and this is kind of gets my hair in a bunch, no notable differences in water chemistry between pre and post drill water quality tests of the wells in question. Okay, so again, do we know how many people had their water tested? Did they get those results? So these were the kind of questions that we went into. And again, I worked with the university, got my clearance and everything, but I said in talking to this one individual, I said, it would be really interesting to know just how many people in your neighborhood don't have water now, or think that their water has gone bad, and can we try and pinpoint and see? So I put together this brief survey. It's not the greatest, but do you have well water? And I had help, but anyway, well water, and where is your well located? Because this is important. What kind of well is it? There's different types of wells. How deep is the well? I mean, one thing you didn't see in that report was they're assuming that all the wells are the same depth. And they're getting their water from the same place. And then have you noticed any change in water quality, taste, smell, and if so, when? Have you noticed any change in flow or quantity? Now, in this particular case, they will always argue, well, there are so many more wells that have been drilled, and every time you drill a new well, you're draining the same aquifer, you're going to lower the flow. I see Fred shaking his head there. Okay. There is amazing flow in this area in Connequanescent. I mean, if that's one thing, they're blessed with a lot of water. Some of it might not be drinkable, but they have a lot of it. And then, of course, if you've had your water tested, would you be willing to share those results? So, this is just to tell you that we kind of think we know what we're doing. I used to worry because I was not trained as someone who does water testing, but learned the methodology and talked to a lot of people who did, and was actually trained by someone who did water testing. And then I found out with some of these companies and actually watched people from these supposedly lab testing companies that are certified by the state. And anyway, so I feel better. We do okay. Okay. So what we'll do on site, we have some meters that we bring that we can do dissolved oxygen, pH, and of course the conductivity. If we see high conductivity, then we know there may be a problem. We have a system in the lab that tests for things like bromide, chloride, fluoride, phosphate, nitrate, and sulfate. And why that's nice is because chloride and bromide we can associate with the drilling fluids and brine, the phosphate and nitrate with agricultural activities, and the sulfate with mining activities. So we have proxies that kind of say whether or not we what might be in the water. And then, of course, we have a couple of different analytical machines. I used to have this one. I'm trying to get a hold of another one. But anyway, we go over to a facility at the University of Pittsburgh. And this is to do what we call our cation analysis, but it gives us about 30 elements.
You have a question, Benjamin?
Yeah.
What do you consider high conductivity?
I would say anything over 500. Okay, because typical drinking water should be between 200 and 300, what they call microsiemens. So when you start seeing things up above 1,000, there are some serious issues.
1,000 out of what?
Again, what's that? No, and that's a good question as far as how many, because again, if you calculate how much total dissolved solids, that's in milligrams per liter, probably about 600 milligrams per liter. So, okay, and then the other thing that my students have done, and the lion's share of this was done by a woman who just graduated from our program, Shiyama Arawatagama. Some of you might know her because she sampled your water, but Anyway, what's the take home? So we actually got, in a couple of different periods of time, I have to thank Marcellus Outreach Butler for helping and volunteering. We got to a whole bunch of homes on one Saturday afternoon in October of 2012, I believe. Was that?
It sounds right.
Anyway. And, you know, just going door to door, because, you know, I tell you what, you know, I get, especially with my long hair now, I have to get it cut, but, or people keep telling me I do. You know, what would you do if I knocked at your door and said, can I test your water? But having people from the neighborhood, you know, really helped. And, you know, a lot of people said, okay, yeah, sure, I'll answer your questions, and then if you want to test my water. But, so out of 143 households, we got 56 respondents indicated that they had problems. And that was way back when. We've actually added more because it's taken a while for things to progressively get worse, and you'll see why. But, you know, again, the idea is that there were color issues, there were taste issues. Unfortunately, a lot of times, your water could be bad and you don't know it because what's contaminating your water, you can't taste or smell. Arsenic used to be called the inheritance powder because it's colorless and odorless, and until they figured out a chemical test that was stable so that the evidence could actually be presented in court, it was the favorite of the heiress. You know, that's why they call it the inheritance powder, because that's how you knock your older siblings off to get the goods. Anyway. Okay, so if we put the map, and again, I probably should have taken all the names off the driveway, but, you know, again, the point is that a blue dot is good water. Okay, and again, this is survey results. A blue dot is good water, a red dot is someone who claims that their water is bad. A yellow dot, and I think that's even more scarier, is that someone doesn't know. They're unsure. You know, I don't know if my water's changed in the last couple of years. So, again, part of the problem is it just seems to be spread out throughout. Now, you might say, well, this is kind of interesting, they're all here, but technically, we didn't see a pattern, or a pattern didn't really emerge. And again, so let's take a look. Well, this is also important. What this eerie looking thing is an elevation map. And as you can see, based on elevation using this kind of imaging, that these are the well pads. Well, they're on the same plane. So they're not lower or, you know, and I think we've already discarded that. But the interesting thing is, even with this, these little lines here are elevation lines, that most of these pads are in the highest point anyway. So if you use the argument that water runs downhill, you really can't predict which direction it's going to run in this particular case, because they're all at the top, at the highest elevation. You can go in any direction. You know, when you're standing on the top of a hill, you can roll over anyway. So, okay. So again, this is kind of some of the results. All right, so water source, okay, everybody had well water, obviously. Well type, unknown, unknown, cable tool, unknown. There were some that were rotary, but not on this page. But more importantly, I mean, the well depths, now this is in meters, so you have to multiply everything by 3. That's another kind of crazy thing when you're dealing with the industry and when you're dealing with scientists. We went metric years ago. So when I publish this, I have to do everything in meters, but everybody else and everybody in this room knows feet, right? So the depths of the wells vary between 62 feet and 900. Now granted, there was only one 900-foot well, but the point is that I couldn't tell you that the average well depth was, because they ranged from shallow, 62 feet, to 450. Okay, that was the typical range for all these wells. Well, what does that mean? Well, you've got two neighbors. They're maybe 500 feet apart. One's got good water, the other one's got bad water. Well, you know, what's with that? Well, you find out one's got a shallow well, one's got a deep well. Okay? But again, we couldn't figure out, you know, again, was there an underlying feature? The other thing is we went and analyzed for a lot of different elements, everything from antimony and arsenic to vanadium and zinc. what did stand out was that 25 households out of the 33 that we actually went and sampled their water had high levels of manganese, which again, when you think manganese, you think mine drainage. Okay? But there were other things, and again, they ranged in concentration. Now, interestingly, and this is work that I'm doing in collaboration with a geologist at the University of Pittsburgh, Dan Bain, what he's done previously is looked at different water samples to see where, if there's a pattern. And what this is calcium and strontium, so you're looking at the ratio of calcium to strontium concentration over calcium to magnesium. Now, why would you want to do something like that with this information? Well, it turns out, like in the woodlands, you can have contaminated water, but because you have a significant amount of good water diluting this, you may not see a lot of contamination, or you might not be able to tell where the contamination came from. But this kind of analysis is independent of concentration. The ratio, so what this is, these blue dots here are Marcellus brines. Okay, and you can see that some of them migrate up into this area here. So depending on where the water came from, or the fluid came from in Marcellus, it can have a different kind of pattern. The blue here is from the Monongahela, and I was kind of laughing because I said, well, is that your example of fresh, clean water? Anyway, but you can see that clusters over here, and then this other stuff is mine drainage. Well, when we plotted all the data from these ratio data from the woodlands, we see that most of the data clusters. Now, the thing that I'm not showing here is, addresses, wells, etc. But what's interesting here is, we did see a number of repeated samples coming from the same wells that suggest that there definitely could be. And again, is it definitive? No. Is it suggestive? Yes. That they are impacted by a brine from shale gas operation.
Where is this now?
What's that?
Where is this now?
This is in Connequanessing.
That's in Connequanessing.
Yeah. So the orange little triangles there are the water wells that we analyzed. And as I said, they represent at least 33 wells, and a number of them sampled repeatedly. The other thing that complicates this is that we've been following two households in particular and have been getting data from them on a pretty regular basis, and this just shows about a year and a half's worth of data. But the first thing that I think, I'd ask you to say that there's a few lines that stay pretty constant. So dissolved oxygen, the amount of oxygen that's in the water stays pretty constant. The temperature stays pretty constant. And again, because we're talking with a subsurface source of water, that's pretty much the case. And the pH, at least in these two wells. But look at some of the other stuff. In particular, the conductivity. The conductivity in these wells is changing on a monthly basis, which means that there's different stuff in there. And certainly, when we look at things like chloride, the chloride levels changes. Now, that is going to drive somebody nuts, especially if someone like myself trying to, put two and two together and figure these things out. Because, if you sampled on this day, you're in good shape, right? Looks like good water. But what if you came in and you sampled on that day? You'd say, oh my goodness, there's something terribly wrong here. So the fact is that, when a company tests the water, they're getting one data point. Okay, it turns out if you pre-drilling if you're going to put in a coal mine, I think it requires at least 5 samples on 5 different days. So there's multiple testing before you go in. So this is basically what that. So again, and these two homes are less than 600 feet apart. Might be 900 feet apart. Okay? So, same neighborhood. You could throw a wall from one house to the other. And yet, they're getting their water from a different source within the
How
aquifer.
does the brine get into the
test? Some of the brine from the fracking goes down to 5,000 feet.
I'll get to that.
Get to that?
I'll get to that. So, and then the other thing is, and this is another set, so these are different households that we've tested. Let's see, CB1 is the one from up there, and HT2 is also from. So again, we're looking at things like methane. Shows up sometimes it's not, because this is 3 tests for 3 different dates, tests for 4 different dates. Okay, this particular well, this is the 900-foot well. They've got some significant problems. Now again, what I've been told by people who know about drilling wells, when you drill 900 feet, you're almost asking for trouble, because you've gone through, I'm looking over at Fred, how many coal seams perhaps? But you got to make sure that you case the well appropriately, okay? But somehow this well, and then the other important thing, and we have additional data, again, because we've been following this case, it has other mixed hydrocarbons. So what that tells us is that although we haven't done the definitive test to prove it, which we hope to do in the immediate future, it is highly suggestive that this well in particular, for example, is impacted by a brine from a thermogenic source. Okay, and it's a good question. Someone asked, well, how does it get there? Well, there's a number of ways that can happen. Okay. The other thing we did was the testing for E. coli and coliform, and I'm happy to say that it backs up. This was another student, that was their job. They tested, I believe, 23 wells. It'll be on the, and you see they're all green, except for a couple. So he tested 29 wells. There were only 2 positives for coliforms, and it wasn't even, that as much. So again, what does that tell us? Well, we can eliminate surface runoff and septic as a source of contamination, with one exception, and it turns out that this individual, and again, Fred, you'll probably say, what? The septic was located 11 feet from the well. So, again, yeah, see, 11 feet up gradient. This one was 74. Yeah. So again, the important thing is that this really, this data actually makes a lot of sense. Okay, so that's our results. Our results indicate that we've been able to establish that, the people in the woodlands are not tripping. They definitely have serious problems. Okay, that they're real problems. That their water quality changes, at least our data says month to month, and we probably know it's almost day to day, okay? So where's the contamination coming from? Well, one potential source, and again, these types of deposits have signatures, but it requires a lot of testing and expensive equipment, but the community sits on top of a shallower gas well deposit called the Little Creek, and in fact there are some legacy wells within that development. In fact, someday, and hopefully this summer, we'll be able to do the walk, because again, are they on, there are some USGS maps that show some of the wells, but we know there's probably more based on just walking the neighborhoods.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
The part where you said they aren't tripping, I want to go back. There were what? Do I remember the numbers right? You got 133 surveys you put out. You got
143.
And 56 with people who subjectively said
we've
had problems with our water.
Yeah.
And of how many of those did you find that they've had some kind of issue with the water?
25 of the 33 wells that we've sampled have high levels of manganese. Manganese. Okay. And I would like to say also that the majority of them had iron, but the problem when you're testing for iron is iron comes out of solution very easily. And unless you take specific precautions to do that, what you wind up in that picture, the first picture that I showed, or in fact my starting slide, that orange, if you let that water sit, that orange would settle down. And then if you were to analyze the water, you'd say, well, there's very little iron in this, and yet you just got, gram quantities of iron.
Sure.
So so it's basically iron and manganese, so the big contaminants in the.
And those are sourced, you think, from which of the three main sources?
Well, again, it's saying that the majority is from mine drainage.
Okay.
Okay, but as I said, now if you look, so this is another plot showing that we have coal mines, abandoned mines, oil and gas wells, and of course the new gas wells. So this map shows all the legacy. I mean, you could probably, I'm going to say, you can find yourself to a small area here, but there's clearly evidence for previous activities as well as the new activities. Now, this is what's come to town since 2009. Okay, so where is this stuff coming from? And have I, found the smoking gun? Well, as I said, in only a couple of the wells, and we're trying to now establish thresholds to make sure, because again, I don't want to, I realize that, I've got to back up what I say with some solid data. But the reality is that since 2009, there have been 15 well pads and 65 wells, lateral wells, put in within 2.5 miles of this community. Most of it to the south, east, and west. According to the data that we've gotten from the DEP, and again, it's incomplete, where the complete data is with the well completions, we are pretty confident, again, based on what was reported by the companies to the DEP, that these are to scale, okay? In other words, the typical lateral, okay? In other words, the lateral well is upwards of 3,000 to 4,000 feet in length. Each one of these was stimulated, slick water stimulation, fracking, whatever you want to call it, with upwards of 3 to 4 million gallons of fluids and 3 million pounds of propane. Now, propane is the sand. Okay, so the point is, we estimate about 300 million gallons and 200 million pounds of propane. That has mass. Okay, that has volume. And this is where I get into trouble, because we have been told that drilling for these formations, because they're so deep, is like Vegas. What goes down 5,000 feet has no impact on the surface. Okay? The reality is that the companies themselves have, not all of them, but folks like Halliburton have tilt meters that they put on the surface to monitor the stimulation. Because those fluids, and it's not just like you're pumping down a little water a little time, it's going in a very short period of time at upwards of 10 to 12,000 psi. Okay? And the purpose is, again, to frack and release the gas. But whenever you see pictures, it's always this way. It's never this way. And so the point is that there's enough lateral deformation that you can measure it at the surface. Now, even if it's a couple of inches by the time it gets to the surface, it's enough to cause, at least this is the hypothesis, I'm a scientist so I can hypothesize, but the idea is that when they do all this within a short period of time, okay, it can cause movement of, again, pre-existing stuff. Now, that's one possible source. The other possible source is when you do start seeing things like fugitive methane and people are lighting their faucets on fire, oftentimes come down to either A, they've fracked in an area where there's a pre-existing well they didn't know about, which is, I don't want to say highly unlikely, but when you realize that there are 300,000 oil and gas wells in Pennsylvania in the same areas that they're fracking before they started. But the other possibility is that 1 in 20 casings fail. So that's a 5% failure rate. Okay, even here we would predict 65 wells, well, what's 5% of 65? You figure there's at least going to be a couple of casings that have failed. And indeed, looking into the DEP violations, there have indeed been a number of failed casings. Yeah.
John, quick question on that slide. Will that kind of lateral fracking also release things that were there from prior activities like mining?
Yeah.
And mobilize those?
Right.
Okay, so even though they're fracking for gas, it will also destabilize and...
Right, because, again, the point is that you've got maybe 5,000 feet of different rock strata, but it's not uniform. There's all sorts of other things, and again, we know that there's mining. Right now, I'm talking to a couple of Allegheny County council people, because I went and I looked at the DEP maps for Fraser and West Deer County, and according, townships, sorry, thank you, townships. According to the DEP maps, both townships are completely undermined. Which means that even though you may be fracking at 5,000 feet, because you're causing all this vibration and movement, that there's a great possibility of, you know, there's mine drainage, there's mine subsidence, although I have to say that thankfully I don't know if, you know, how much longwall there's there, but anyway, yeah. So just, yeah.
What's the gas pressure after they're done fracking? What's the gas pressure?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer for you, but I do know that one of the main reasons why they have to flare when
Is to get rid of the excess
is to
pressure.
get rid of the excess pressure until it gets down to a point where they can cap it and control it.
Okay, I got another question. You know how a coffee pot works?
Yeah,
Percolating.
right.
Okay, you mix gas and water under pressure. How far will it migrate?
It's another good question.
Well, I'd like to have an answer.
Okay. I don't have an answer for you.
Well, isn't that what brings brine up to the surface?
Oh, right. I mean, yeah, because they put in all that pressure, it comes back up, and it doesn't all come back up, you know, the first day, although 80% of it comes back up in the first year.
Now, the casing failure, what causes a casing failure?
Any number of things.
Well, movement of the ground down there is one.
Well, movement of the ground, bad cement, okay? So
Where do you get your statistic of 5% failure on the case?
that's a recent study out of Cornell.
Okay.
I have a quick question too.
Yeah.
You talk about the sources of this water contamination. What they do with the wastewater afterwards, the deep well injection, does that have any effect on the contamination as well? When they pump that water directly back down?
Well, again, right now, we don't have any deep well injections here. There's also the possibility there are several surface impoundments in the area as well. And I'm working with a group down in Washington County that, you know, they just recently, it was in the paper last week, when they were pulling up the lining, because the company's finally, you know, taking this thing apart, they found areas where apparently, quote unquote, it was not a leak. But they're remediating the situation. So the surface impoundments, again, that's another potential, especially with long-term storage of these fluids at the surface. So anyway, but it's just, you know, when that was not there in 2007 or even 2008. All these wells went in within 2 years' time. So again, and what I'm showing here, this is, so some of the households, and again, I've redacted which ones and haven't compared to the data that we have. I mean, we know, but the point is what I'm showing here is household one. They filed a complaint in 2010, and you can see that this is the industry's test results, that there are elevated levels of barium, in some cases chloride. But again, I'm happy to say that there's no microbes. But more to the point, let me see. Okay, so now this was some of the, again, this is part of the dynamic if you're trying to put, you know, connect the dots. You know, I was not there when they did the drilling, but we were able to get, you know, we need to back up what the folks have told me when the wells went in. And so this is according to the DEP as to when these wells went in. The Vols, first one, Vol number 3 went in, actually that's 1H went in January 7th, 2011. 2H went in 1/7/2011. Grossick went in 11/4/2011. This is the kind of data that we need in order to, connect the dots basically, and I'm going to wrap up very quickly. This is from the DEP. Again, they came in 2000, this is in February. One well was drilled in January. The complaint was filed. They came in February, took samples. You can see that for the same household, February 10th data for barium, it was 0.14. They came back a few days later, it was 0.49. And then they came back a couple months later, it was back down to 1.4. But clearly this is DEP data showing that there was an incursion in this particular well.
What's the significance of barium?
It is associated with drilling the brines coming up. So the brines come up have high barium, strontium, bromide, and chloride. Those are the 4 indicators. So again, the same thing here. Strontium in milligrams per liter, 0.163. And again, this is shortly after the well was completed, according to what the DEP report said. And again, it goes to 0.16 to 0.2, back down to 0.18. So there was clearly a change in water quality even within this short period of time. Again, as I demonstrated previously, that's the problem of spot water testing. You almost have to monitor the whole time. This is just a short list of a number of DEP violations that were cited. So again, is this another possible source? Absolutely. Okay? So just to remember and remind you what the key findings were, it's clear that number one, that we have found good wells and bad wells within the woodlands. Okay? The water quality is changing even today. Okay? I think we've kind of rendered this irrelevant in the sense that it really doesn't matter whether or not they're uphill or downhill. It matters where the groundwater is coming from. We do know that there are issues regarding legacy issues, and here even the DEP's own data dispute that there was no noticeable difference in water chemistry. So again, we have a serious problem, and the upshot is that there are at least 30 families that currently are getting their drinking water from a volunteer water drive. So the survey indicates 56 out of 143 with issues, 25 homes with manganese in excess. Light hydrocarbons were detected in some wells, and again, they were mixed hydrocarbons indicative of thermogenic sources. But because I haven't done the isotopic data, I can't tell you if it's Marcellus or if it's Little Creek, but nevertheless, that's the situation. It's complicated by the fact that the well depths range from 600 to 900 feet. And then the extended monitoring of the 2 wells, oh there we go, 670 feet apart, show that they're not drilled, so you can't assume that just because one well is good, that another person's isn't going to be. Legacy issues include shallow gas and oil wells and strip mining, but more significantly, 15 pads and 65 laterals within a 2.5 mile radius since 2009, and 3 million gallons of fluids and 3 million tons of propane per well, which amounts to a heck of a lot of stuff. I'll end with this, and getting back to asking the DEP to do their job for the citizens of Pennsylvania. This is data based on an investigation that Laura Legier had done of the different locations of water complaints since 2008 to 2013. The blue dots represent ones in which a person filed the complaint, the DEP investigated and said you have fine water or it's not the driller's fault. The red are where they found not only contamination, but the driller was held liable. Yellow, I think, is still under investigation or equivocal, but the upshot is, and damn, it's too small. But anyway, as I mentioned before, according to this study, there were 26 complaints in Butler with 0 found to be a problem. It's even worse in Washington County, where it was over 90 and only 5 complaints were verified.
John?
Yes?
Do you have a total for the whole state?
Yeah. And, well, according to Laura Legier, she found that there were 161 cases in which the state found that there were problems.
Any radiation in this water?
Good question, and we're not testing for it. Okay, so we don't know. So, again, we see, that's the, I'll just, okay, I want to thank the students who are working on the project. These guys, you know, Shyama, Jennifer, and Lucas have graduated and gone off to greener pastures. Matt just defended, and he's going to graduate this spring. These are two current, these students, Colleen, Scott, and Renee, are current students. I am funded by the Heinz Endowments and the Cole County Foundation. So that's in full disclosure. And I want to thank the citizens of the Woodlands, the residents of the Woodlands, because they've been very, they've, you know, opened their doors to me, and we hope we can get something resolved. But I thank you for your time. And I'll answer your questions.
May we get any of this information online?
Yeah, I mean, the scientific portion of this is being submitted for, I mean, it's going to be within, it has to be within the next 2 weeks, because the editor just told me I got to get it in. But again, it's important that this be peer reviewed and you know, the data out there. And yes, it'll be posted on the series site and I do have. I'm also preparing what we would call a white paper, which is kind of what the Penn State does, where it tries not to be as technical. So that will be available, as well as an executive summary, which I've already basically written up and is going to be distributed to a number of venues, and I'll post that as well. Yeah.
You said something about thermographic testing, you haven't done it.
Right.
Is that, can you actually tell whether that methane comes from a legacy or
Absolutely.
hydrocarbons from?
Right, they have a specific signature. So it turns out that carbon comes in 3 flavors. Carbon 12, carbon 13, carbon 14. Okay, carbon 14 is radioactive, that's not what we're talking about. But 12 and 13, biological systems like us, we like C12. So biogenic methane is light, because it only has mostly C12 in it. But the thermogenic stuff, which has come from the rocks, has a lot of the 13 in it. The other thing is that how much of that is in that particular gas is unique to each formation. So the Marcellus has a signature, the Utica has a signature, and the Little Creek has a signature. So by doing this analysis, we should be able to tell where the gas is coming from.
But you can't like do a DNA type thing that says this comes from this particular well versus a well that's only 1,850 feet.
Right, and that's, I mean, well, again,
I thought Duke came up with that.
No, yeah, well, you can do it with the isotopic, yeah. You can tell whether or not you can tell which formation, I'm not gonna say you can't tell which well it came from, but you can, because in this case, there's 65 of them, okay? But you can tell whether or not it came from Marcellus or if it came from Blue Creek. Yeah.
As to the definitive part that you're saying is, I guess, the next step, where you can say definitively. For example, on the DEP conclusions, where they essentially say there's no, we can't conclude that there's a causal connection between the fracking and the problems with the 26 wells that were complained of.
Right.
At what point, or what do you need to reach the point at which you can directly repudiate that conclusion?
Well, right now, I think I have, with the data that I have, I'm going on the 15th of May to meet with people, or at least that's what's scheduled right now, to meet with folks at the DEP. And I'm going to raise that question. Again, what I try, you know, the difficulty is that, you know, I would say that if I were able to show, because even methane is not considered poisonous, and it's not regulated. It's not on that list of MCLs. Okay? So what they will say is, okay, show me in that list that the EPA says, and we'll do something about it. Okay? You know, that's the real issue. That there are things that the contaminants that are showing up are on the second list most often. So what I talk about is there's a difference between a well being contaminated by the drilling and a well being impacted by the drilling. And I think,
water's on fire. It's fall in the first place.
no.
Has that happened here? In Butler County?
Well, I personally have not seen it, but I've sampled water that I mean, I'm not gonna tell the homeowner like, hey, can we light your, you know? But we've gotten samples where it's been that high, yes. Yeah.
We also saw that because of a high hydrogen sulfide concentration in the well water, where you could light it on fire in Connoquenessing area.
You have.
Yeah, I'm a geologist.
So how do you feel about, do you think that I'm off base with regards to, like, where is?
The point of fracking is to open up the cracks,
Right.
the natural frac joints, as they call, as we call them, and keep them open. But when you do that, that puts stress on all of the overburden, and other joints can open up. You're right.
Okay, thank you.
That relates to my issue. I live on a farm in Armstrong County. They drilled a Marcellus well 2,000 feet from my water well last week. And I'm living the nightmare because I don't know what will happen, or I know the methane could migrate and come up through an old wellhead in the basement of my house. And I wouldn't be able to smell it or know it was there. I know that there's a mine down there somewhere. It could come up through the old mine. I know that there's an old gas well on the property. Problems could come from that. This is like, to me, a series of time bombs have now had their fuses ignited. Even just the aged infrastructure that we live in Western Pennsylvania with 60-year-old plumbing, water pipes and sewer pipes, and you start exploding stuff under the ground and putting dangerous chemicals under there. And that creates so many different ways that they can get into the air and the water and my soil. And I have no way to protect myself ever again. I don't know if it'll migrate or it won't.
Did they test your well?
Yeah,
Okay, did they give you the results?
some things.
Would you be willing to share that with me?
Sure I
Okay.
will.
Okay. And that, as I said, I would do that for any of you here, because that's the most important thing, because we even found that if you go to the DEP website right now, they have a list of what they would suggest is a good thing to have tested in your well water. But they don't do those tests themselves. So, you know, yeah.
But it puts our whole economy in jeopardy because we are on an ant colony of old mines and old wells, any one of which could be affected by drilling.
Right. And it doesn't, again, we've seen things where it may not be the first well, it may not be the second well, it'll be the fifth or sixth that they're putting in a particular pad. But, you know, that's why, again, we have an opportunity, especially in this November, to pressure our legislature to start legislating, whether it's a severance tax, whether it's bonding, or whatever. We need to be protected. That's what we can do in a positive way to make sure that if something does go wrong, that there are resources to help fix it. Because right now, it's clear that the impact fee has failed the citizens of the Woodlands. Because they were told by the county that we're sorry, but we don't have, you know, we use the impact fees for something else. Yeah.
We have an election coming up. Do we have anyone running for governor that is going to be supportive?
Yes, there's several of the, well, again, I don't want to, several of the Democratic candidates have put forward, at least, I know there's one candidate that's saying 10% severance tax. But, you know, again, you also don't want to be a one-issue person, but we definitely need, I mean, every other state, including West Virginia, has a severance tax. And there's a reason for that. The companies aren't penalized because it's only on the amount of gas that they produce. Okay? Yes?
Okay, we have heard from our county commissioners, from the supervisors in Connoquenessing, that there's always been a problem with the Woodlands water. The stuff you talk about today, with that, could you refute that?
Well, again, I would say, yes, there have been problems, and there's an explanation for why. But then again, with the wells that have been drilled most recently, so to speak, or, you know, that there's clear evidence. I mean, you saw all the blue dots. There's good water in the Woodlands, okay? But there are others that had okay water, they bought their Culligan system, they bought their filtration system, but it's gotten intolerable. In fact, I mean, one of the worst evenings for me was a Friday night, went up to visit somebody to get their water for the first time, and I said, well, you know, we have to do, he goes, yeah, I know, you gotta do the flush and everything. We ran out of water. His well went dry that night, and he stood there in shock, because for the how many years he lived in that house, it never went dry. So, you know, again, things are changing. So when you have activity like this, it can stimulate, you know, make things go from bad to worse. And yet, you know, it's like, okay, you have a back problem, and then someone rear-ends you, and it really puts your back out, who's going to pay for the chiropractor? Okay, you've had a pre-existing condition. So, you know, that's the kind of thing that's going on right now. Yeah.
John, all the drilling's going on farmland, I understand. And have there been issues at all that we know that have affected animals on the farmland or crops?
Again, I'm not, you know, that's not what I'm studying, and we have a number of people like Michelle Bamberger from Cornell and a number of others who are actually addressing that.
Okay.
So yes, there are the cases, and again, this is something, it's very difficult because the farmer wants to get his cows to market. Okay, the dairy wants to produce the milk. Okay, they don't want to say, hey, I've got drills. My wife was coming back from she's a scientist too, coming back from a retreat in Nemacolin. They drove by Trax Farms. She had to call me to tell me how bad the air was, and now we find out that one of the homeowners next to Trax Farms has signed not a retainer, whatever, an agreement with the gas company that now owns the wells, $40,000 to say, I'm not going to complain. Okay? So, I mean, this is the reality, that there are people, and then as far as drilling on their homes, I'm working with a community right now, you know, on and off, but here's the situation. There's, you know, you've heard about Mars and the school there. Well, there is a well site that they want that you know, the lease has been signed and everything. This brand new, whatever you want to call it, development. We call them development where I come from, in Long Island. But anyway, so it's in like 3 phases. Phase 1, 15 people bought their homes. They range in price from $250,000 to $350,000. Okay, quarter-acre plots. Okay, they got their mineral rights when they bought the house. Second group went in, and the third group that's being built now. The developer kept the leases or the mineral rights and leased to the company. And now the 15 original owners are being pressured to lease. And what are they going to get for their quarter acre? They're going to get $1,000 and the promise of $20 a month for a couple of months. Okay? And they don't know what to do. And I said the first thing you do is get a lawyer, get representation, which they've done. And the second thing was stick together. Because what did they say? This is where, you know, you love an industry with transparency. They were told by their, you know, the landmen that their neighbors had leased. And when they finally got everybody in the same room with me, I said, okay, I need a show of hands. Who leased? You know, no holds barred. I'm not going to, you know, pass judgment or anything. No one in the room had leased. So the whole point is that what do you do now? You've got a $250,000 home. You've got a mortgage. You've got mortgage insurance. Okay, and for $1,000
a month's mortgage.
And yeah.
I'd like to point out that community where there's 15 people did not lease. I was present at the Mars Area School District school board meeting, the presentation by Rex Energy. They showed that they had colored who had leased, all in yellow. They showed that whole area as having been leased, and yet we know 15 people did not lease.
Yes.
Could you sum this up? Give us a conclusion that we could quote what you have found.
Well, essentially what I've been able to establish is, yes, there has been a change in water quality in this community that is concurrent with the new development of putting in 65, 15 well pads and 65 laterals. And that, the main concern is that when you drill in Pennsylvania, you have to recognize the fact that we have legacy issues that, the desolation of smoke, you don't want to wake the dragon up, okay? That by doing the fracking, and again, it's one well, not a problem. A couple of wells, not a problem. But when you have 65 wells in a short area, which is what they need to do to fully develop a play. And now I understand that within that area, and I don't know where yet, I've got to find out, but there's plans to put another 40 wells.
Oh my God.
And they're doing pre-drill testing. Now, I've already shown you that the water's bad. If they go and test the water and say, oh, well, you already have, an existing problem, is that really a true pre-drill? Because, they may say, well, where's my data before they came in? And I'm going to say to them, well, where's your data from before you even started? And they don't have it. So, yeah.
In an ideal world, what would we want our legislators to do to protect us from all of this?
Basically, enact legislation that, covers both, the drillers and the homeowners. And especially those people who don't lease. Because they don't get the royalties, they don't get any money whatsoever. And I'm not saying that it's all about the money, but the reality is your foundation is shifted, your water's gone bad, and you don't have the money to fix it.
May I offer what the Marcellus Outreach Butler's position is? Moratorium until they know more about what they're doing.
New York still has
If you
one,
look
correct?
at
That's completely unrealistic.
municipalities,
There's not, how many legislators are
in
going
other
to vote
words,
for
a lot of
it?
municipalities
they're
are not
gonna
going to water
do-
their
well,
city
hold
water
on, yeah.
from deep wells.
Right.
Have you looked at any of those to see what the variations are? In
I-
areas where there is no.
Right, no, that's a good question, and no, we have not. The only thing that I've been working with as far as municipal water is concerned is, look, we also are part of a tri-state monitoring of the three rivers within this region. So we go out, our group goes out twice a month up the Allegheny and takes water samples. So we're dealing with the surface water that most of the folks that live along, the rivers get their water from. But that's an excellent suggestion.
How much variation is there in the river water?
It depends on
It depends on rain and all this stuff.
yeah, and time and seasonality too. Yes.
When you meet with the DEP with this new information, what is it going to take for them to change what they look for, their method of testing?
Well, I'm afraid the main change has got to come from Harrisburg in the top, okay? It's the governor, because the secretary of the DEP has been appointed by the governor. He's never done any testing in his life. He's a lawyer that litigates things, which he may be great at what he's done, but that's been a problem from day one. And I would even roll back even to what Rendell was doing, because we were working with people in the Rendell administration way back when. That was 2010.
How come people aren't suing the DEP?
They are.
They are.
And right now there's a case in Amwell and the deposition. So here's another one just to keep in mind too. And again, I don't want to put such a pale on things, but the deposition of the Southwest Regional Officer, okay, said that if a landowner has problems and they settle with the company, the DEP does not file a violation. So right now, a major case in Washington County that I've been part of has settled. So the DEP, even though there's evidence of soil contamination, there's evidence of water contamination and significant water contamination to the aquifer, it all goes away and the company will not get cited because they settled.
So some of the problem is you don't know whether you're dealing with Satan or Lucifer.
Yes.
Yeah, all of the Democratic governor candidates are for impact tax on the drilling. The present governor, of course, is not. But I want to bring up, this county had, what do you call it, $2.3 million that it got from the drilling permits. And the Allegheny Front program this morning reminded me that each of the counties that received these monies were to report by April 15th what they did with it. And I think that's important because I'm not sure, and I'll ask this county what it did, but this county had some of that money went for its own projects.
Right.
And others went, what got distributed, including the Connequanese, but they didn't address the problems that the woodland people are having.
Right.
You know, and that's, that money, I think it was Act number 100, should be used to rectify damage at woodland.
But officially, that has nothing to do with drilling. So that's why they don't put that money.
They deny the fact that, well,
Yeah.
well, you know.
They're still keeping their head.
Well, I do want to say too that I have met with the housing authority of Butler, and they do want to do something, but they're limited with what they have. And they thought, well, maybe we'll just go in and drill more wells. And I said, no, that makes no sense because there's going to be more gas wells going in. And there's no way now that you can, you know, ensure that the water's not going to go bad at a future date. But and then I think the one idea was to put in cisterns. But, you know, I'm saying this is 2014, this is America. And we have people living, you know, under duress. Yeah.
The big picture, after, what do they do with all the toxic waste that's left after fracking? Where does that all go?
Well, there's a couple of things, and again, you know, the state of Pennsylvania allows the drillers to leave certain waste on site. If they're supposed to, no, not underground, at the surface, buried, okay? If it's properly immobilized, okay? But again, how do they know if it's been properly immobilized? Because the company has to file a closure report and report these things. And I mean, basically, you're trusting the company to say that they did it right, and we know that there are cases where it didn't happen. The other thing is that, like the drill cuttings, it took out my Marcellus Fax one, but a single well, because you can go down and sideways, okay, a single well will generate over 1,000 tons of rock waste. And half of that is Marcellus, and half of that probably has radioactivity, okay, because of the rock itself. Now, how much? Good question, okay? I only have gotten, the samples of Marcellus I've gotten have been from a quarry in upstate New York where the rocks are at the surface and it's already been leached out, so that doesn't help. But the point is that because they've gone down maybe 5,000 feet and gone out 3,000 to 5,000 feet, about half of that material coming up the hole just in drilling the hole. And then what I didn't show you as well, I've got lovely pictures. No, I can show everything down, it's okay. But as that water goes down and sits there, or the fracking solutions, over time it rapidly becomes more and more like the rock itself, meaning that we looked at chloride levels. They're up to 300 grams per liter of chloride. Okay, you can't purify that with reverse osmosis. Okay, the only way that you can do that is through distillation, which requires energy and money. Okay, so the thing is that within a few weeks, months, whatever, the water or the fluids that come back up the well have high bromide, high chloride, high strontium, high barium, and again, this has been hotly debated, literally and figuratively, how much radioactive material. Now, what's been happening is that the companies have been recycling, but again, this is another story. Good news, bad news. Good news is they're recycling. Bad news, they're recycling because they're using open impoundments. So the fluids that have been sitting down there and have the hydrocarbons and have the complex chemicals and all that stuff are sitting at the surface with a liner that maybe is this thick, okay? But more important, that in order to make sure that my buddies, the microbes, don't go crazy, they aerate them. So right now, we just got word that the court date is January 5th, 2015 for a case that was filed, you know, almost a year ago. Okay, but again, I would say one of my heroes is John Smith and his wife Kendra Smith. They're attorneys down in Washington County. They were the people that helped challenge Act 13. They are amazing people and they're doing wonderful things, but we're moving forward on that case. But again, it's doing things that the industry can do better, you know? But even with what they're doing, they have to realize too that, you know, pounding the earth at 15,000 or 12,000 psi, even at 5,000 feet, is going to shake things up. One last question.
Okay. Well, I have two questions. First, did Conquenessant, did they have a pre-drill testing for their wells?
Apparently, I think 95 of the respondents said they had pre-testing.
Okay.
Yeah, but we didn't get, again, a bunch of them said, I think 6% said they never got their data. Another group, you know, again, you get this thing in the mail, and what do you do with it? You're not, you know, are you going to think that a year from now, 2 years from now, there's going to be problems? That was part of the issue. They came in, everything was safe, everything was going to be ducky. We just want to, you know, test your water, and that's it. So, you know, a lot of times people can't find where they put this stuff.
The second question, what does DEP say about not releasing all their test results when they test water? They only release the first 3.
Their stand is, apparently in 2008 and 2009, they did a study. Okay, unbeknownst to the rest of Pennsylvania, they did a study and they came up with certain things that they felt were indicative of Marcellus and drilling, and that if that showed up in your drinking water, bingo. Okay, that's what their assessment was, and that's what they say that they're testing. The reality is, when you look, it's just a standard water test. So,
and they have the results.
Yeah,
know?
and they have results.
I mean, that's the infuriating thing, that they have the results and they're not releasing them.
Yes.
I realize this is inconsistent with what we were talking about, but are you aware of any human toxicology reports?
It's now coming out. The Southwest Pennsylvania Health Project has been doing that now for over a year and 2 years now. So again, and not as self-plug, a lot of information. I had an amazing 2-day conference at Duquesne University with professors and researchers that were funded by people like the Park Foundation, the Heinz Foundation. It's online if you go to, or even if you go to MOB. Do you have the link?
I think we do.
If we don't, we will.
Okay.
I think we do.
So there's 24 talks. If you want to know about fugitive gas migration and failure of well casings, Tony Agrafi has a talk. If you want to know about methane and the highest peak of methane is behind Capitol Hill, and it's been demonstrated by the guys from Duke. Rob Jackson's talk is on there. Bob Howard's talk is on there. My own talk. So a lot of information. And the health issues with the animals, Michelle Bamberger and her husband Robert Oswald from Cornell, they have a presentation, and even the economics, the boom bust. Tioga County is, and Bradford, which are, you know, they had the brunt of it initially. They're now going through the bust. And, yeah, and people in Dimick still don't have water. Okay, I mean it's still dragging. Yes.
Are you and your project working with anyone in Southeast Ohio, the Kentucky Southeast Ohio region?
You know, we're not doing anything specifically there at this point, but
you know, through your Rolodex.
Yeah.
That you can talk to and share information.
Oh yeah, no, we have. I mean, this network with West Virginia and a number of other groups. Yeah, I want to make one other point. Okay, and when I give a regular general science talk, a lot of this stuff just went through the roof in 2005. And you know, and I hate to say, you know, people will say, oh, that Halliburton loophole, I've heard of it time and time again. It's a reality. And what I recently discovered with all these students graduating, I said, what the hell does that really say? What does the Energy Act of 2005 say? And to my shock, not only does it exempt hydraulic fracturing from the Safe Drinking Water Act and related legislation, but also subsurface gas storage. We have a community in Clearfield, which is sitting on Pennsylvania's largest natural gas storage facility, and they have problems, okay? In West Virginia, the same thing, because what's happening, there's so much gas, they have no place to put it. They're overcharging, and where's the geologist again? The whole idea that even with the gas itself, you've stuffed this stuff back into the Oriskany and an Onondaga, and it's overpressuring the strata. So there's problems in Clearville. So again, what we need to do is at the local level, we make change happen in November, and also at the national level, because the other thing is you realize that this is all, 50% of this stuff is going out of the country. Okay, so.
Which is fine.
No, because
Yeah.
if it does, then we're paying $11 a 1,000 cubic feet again.
Sorry, you're gonna be paying it anyway.
Anyway,
So that's no.
thank you.
Very good.